Delivering meaningful catchment improvements with OverseerFM. For those of you that don't know me, there's some familiar faces in the room, but my name's Alastair Taylor. I'm the Business Development Manager at Overseer, which means I'm responsible for stakeholder engagement and helping users. On my left, I've got Michaela, who some of you will no doubt have interacted with through the help desk. And then on her left is Mark John, who has recently joined us as our Chief Technology Officer. So MJ heads up our software development and our science teams. So nothing to keep him busy at all. What we want to work through today is yesterday's talk sort of set this up quite nicely, I think, because really it's a bit of a mea culpa. It's a bit of being humble and admitting that sometimes you make mistakes. And really just we wanted to run through where are we at with Overseer, because obviously there's been a wee bit going on in the last few years, but then really focus in on the catchment groups tool within Overseer, because we launched that back in 2020. It was actually released as our first release during the first lockdown, and maybe it's something to do with that timing, maybe it's something else, but that's what we want to try and tease out today. Essentially, there's about 120 farm groups set up within the software at the moment, but the majority of those are for corporate farms rather than for catchment groups. And so we want to try and tease out today, what are some of the things that we could perhaps do a little bit differently? How can we break some of those barriers down? Is it a suitable tool even? If it's not a suitable tool, then let's go and develop something else. Because one of the things that we touched on with some of the earlier groups is I guess there's still a little bit of misunderstanding about not only what Overseer is, but also the ownership structure and our operating model. So Overseer Limited operates OverseerFM and Overseer Ed and Overseer Science. And we are essentially a not-for-profit software as a service business. So the company's constitution precludes us from paying any dividends. Everything has to be reinvested back into the business. And so essentially when you look at the subscription price is my sales forecast divided by how much we need to run the business and to do the science and the IT and the customer support. And one divided by the other gives us the cost of subscription. So if we double the number of subscriptions, we can lower the price. So what does Overseer do though? Why do we use it? Why have we gone through the last few years? It's really about how do we understand that picture on the right hand side of the screen from a nutrient management, nutrient flow perspective. We can't measure it. It's not possible at this current level of technology to measure it. And so if we want to understand the nutrient flows within a New Zealand farm, we have to model it. And so Overseer enables us to do that in the context that actually New Zealand farming systems are relatively complex on an international basis. So the other groups have heard me mentioning I spent 4 years working for a French fertilizer company, and if you're doing a nutrient budget for a cereals farm in the Paris Basin, it's pretty simple. You take a soil test, you work out what the gap is, you work out what the yield's going to be, you put the nutrients in, you do the budget at the end, job done. But in New Zealand, we grow baleage over here and we feed it out over here, or we feed it in a shed, or we import soya from Argentina and bring it in. We have some cows that graze over here and some that graze over here. We take some silage, we do other things. They're actually quite complex processes and systems compared to farms internationally. And so what we want to understand is how do we get the best use out of those nutrients, and also from an environmental perspective, what are we losing? So what's the nitrate loss, what's the phosphorus loss, and increasingly obviously what's the greenhouse gas emissions. And Overseer enables us to understand that. So following the science review and then the science redevelopment program, we've now come through that with the technical advisory group giving us the big tick, saying that it's excellent for pasture, good for crops. It's based on 30 years of New Zealand science. And really it's, to me, the unique selling point that we come across all the time in conversations with people really is this whole idea around, it used to be every conversation was about nitrate. Now, pretty much, every conversation is about greenhouse gases. But we can't forget about nitrate as well, and we can't forget about phosphorus. So the only way that we can look at, if I try this mitigation in my farm system, what is the impact going to be on greenhouse gas losses, what's the impact going to be on nitrate, what's the impact going to be on phosphorus, then we have to use Overseer to understand that. And the move that was made back in 2018 when we set up OverseerFM away from the horrible, dirty old legacy software means that now we have this incredibly powerful database. So 15,000 farms in the database, 10,000 users, about 2,000 users a month interacting with the software. And within that, so we've got about 5,000 dairy farms with results, 5,000 beef farms, 3,000 sheep farms, 2,500 cropping farms, etc., etc. So a really good picture of usage, a really big collection of data, so about 150,000 analyses now in the database, which means that then what are the other things that we can use the database for? What are the other things we can use those analyses for? They might have been set up to meet a regional council requirement. They might have been set up to meet a dairy supply company requirement, but there's so many other things we can do. Can we use it for applying for a sustainable linked loan? Can we use it for sharing information in a catchment group? Can we use it for applying for FAP Plus farm assurance? Can we use it for reducing our fertiliser use? All of these things that we can use that one analysis for from within the database. So I nicked this off Alison at Waikokapū, and she obviously nicked it off Richard at Thriving Southland. And this is, I think, the tarted up version that he referred to. But I think what we very much see Overseer as part of that toolkit for the farmer who is very much at the centre. So the centre of OverseerFM is the farm account. The farmer should own the farm account. The farmer decides where that information goes. The farmer decides who that information gets shared with. They can share it with those people on the right-hand side, the banks, the fertiliser companies, the others. They sometimes have to share it with regulators. What we're trying to look at today is how do we tease it out to get more sharing happening in the catchment group context. So thinking about the farm account, some of you may have seen this, some of you may not. We introduced this dashboard back in 2021, just before field days, really trying to present back to the farmer some more information about their farm account. So they get a generic quick description of the farm up on the top right-hand side there. They can see how many analyses they've got, who's been paying the subscription. They can see trends, so that can go right the way through the measurements or the modelling that we've got within the software, and some of the data input parameters as well. And the bit that always leads to a conversation at things like field days is the benchmarking. So with this one, we can see where this farm sits in terms of its greenhouse gas emissions compared to the rest of the database. So it's looking at, and we can see with quite a few of these, we get this quite nice double bell curve. So we've got the sheep and beef and arable farms in here, and then we've got the dairy curve going forward. But a really nice, I'd say, 147,000 analyses in there. So we can look at all of these things, and that includes looking at future state. If you've got a plan in there, that will show up in your trends graph. But we've got this bit down here, the farm groups, and unfortunately there's not too many of them that are like this demonstration farm, and actually are a member of a farm group. And the reason why we want to have that is we've got this sort of, this is, and maybe this is wrong, feel free to challenge this within when we do a little bit of a brainstorming exercise in a minute. This is how we think the software can benefit farmers within the context of the environmental improvement that they can make and the story that they can tell. So engaging with the software, engaging with an RP maybe, coming up with the plan, then collaborating. That might be within a supply base, it might be within a catchment group, it might be within a corporate farm, making the changes and then telling your story. And obviously at the top we've got some people that we've worked with, helping them to tell their story. So the Waikokapū catchment group, the McDonald's down in Southland, and then Cam, who was obviously here yesterday, telling their story about how they've utilised the software to make meaningful change and to deliver outcomes for themselves or their communities. And then this slide from Richard really sort of struck home for me yesterday in terms of, I think, when I think about the farm groups tool that we've got here, I think this probably kind of sums up where we are. We're another one of these pipes that's sitting in front of the farmer, and it's just in the too hard basket. And potentially, I think one of the challenges we have in here as well is, it means I'm sharing information with other people. How comfortable do I feel about that? actually I'm just going to go and focus on financial resilience or animal welfare or wintering regulations. I'm not even going to look at that pipe. I'm just going to ignore it for now. So yeah. So the farm groups tool, so we developed it by going out and talking to some farm groups. I was saying to one of the groups before, I remember I was out at the Rirwhakaitu catchment group up near Rotorua the night that Wales beat Fiji in the 2019 World Cup. So that shows how long ago that consultation was happening before we launched it in 2020. You go, shit, we're still here. So if we go and actually look in our demonstration software, I'm just going to have to go back. Should have done that before, shouldn't I? So we can go into, this is in our demo software. It's a fictitious dairy farm, very loosely based on the location of my father-in-law's farm down in Southland. He doesn't know he's in a catchment group, but everybody else does. So you can see where's the farm, where are the other farms in the group. And we've got different, one of the things that came back from that initial discussion with the groups was obviously around that privacy. So we set it up so that you could perhaps have, Janet might be the coordinator for the catchment group. Your initial setting would be only the coordinator can see the farm detail, only the coordinator can see the results. So it would then be a question of presenting back to the catchment group. Hopefully you then get a greater level of trust, you get a greater level of buy-in, so you can then share it so that the owners of the farm accounts, and that's what we've got here. So the owner of this farm account can see where do I sit within the catchment group. But if I go and sit on, click on the farm next door, I can see some information about it. So I can say, well, I'm a dairy farm. I probably should compare myself with these guys. They're also a dairy farm, but I don't know who it is. And then the third level of trust is obviously actually we now trust each other. We're prepared to share the information. It's open slather. We can all see what's going within here. So at this level, we can see, if we click on that one, this is our farm, and we can see where we sit from a nitrogen loss perspective, both in terms of kgs per hectare and total loss. And we can go through and look at N surplus. Nitrogen applied.
So can you're looking from these graphs, can you understand why some people are at the extremes? Can you click on them?
I think it's so I would say that you've as usual you've gone ahead of me, Janet. In that I would say this to me this is it's interesting and somewhat useful, but it leads to the next slide. So on that note, I won't bother scrolling down the rest of the screen which gives you nitrogen surplus and nitrogen conversion efficiency and phosphorus and greenhouse gas. But what you can really, I think, if you're looking to make change, what you then do is to go down to this level where you're looking at it by block. So you're actually looking at, so from this farm's perspective, these are my blocks. This is where I am, so I could take the view, sweet, I'm not the problem, I'm all good. Or I could say, well, actually, I'd like to understand what's the difference between these two blocks, which I'm probably having a conversation about anyway. But equally, to me, it's this driving point around, if we can make some changes in these 5, 6, 7, 8 blocks, then this, Meredith coming in and saying, sorry, catchment, you need to reduce by 25%. Suddenly it's actually now, if we take out those ones and look at what changes we need to make there, what does that then leave? If we can deal with those major, so we can go into those blocks and understand, is it being driven by the climate? Is it being driven by the soil? Is it being driven by the practices? And to consider what we might do on those blocks to make a difference.
Doesn't that mean that people are kind of being, I'm thinking of pointing the finger at people and going, it's going to be hectic.
Put it on a post-it, yeah. And I think that is part of it, yeah.
But if you've got a catchment group that's having a full and frank conversation about it, they'll be able to see where they sit individually, but also what are those risks and what are those practices that they actually need to change. Because if you can filter it so that you can take the worst 10%, for instance, then it's how do we make that change as a whole, but also individually. And that's the key to get the biggest bang for your buck.
And I think,
that people that are going into this are also willing to have that conversation.
Yes, you've got to have that. And I think where we are seeing it, where we are seeing it used successfully, I think that, and without preempting the discussion, I think is one of the drivers seems to be that there is a coordinator, so there's somebody external that's doing that coordination and doing it. If I think of the work that I can't remember, KNS, Steph and Laura have done with, thank you. Second time it's gone out of my head. Rangitikei River Collective. So they've got 120 farms in the collective that have done Overseer and then have worked through this process. But you've got to have, you've got to be at that stage of being able to be prepared to go, yes, it might be me. And if it is me, what am I going to do? And am I going to own that and investigate it, or am I going to go, a lot of you, and stomp out the room in a strop? So you've got to be at that level of trust, absolutely. And I think there's a big barrier there of, well, actually, I don't know if I'm there yet, which I think is something that we all need to try and break down. And hopefully this makes it that it's actually if you're in a discussion, and as you say, if you're in a group that's looking to improve, then hopefully it is coming from that place of actually, well, let's look at how we can make improvements and understand what the changes might be. One of the examples, some other people might remember this as well. I remember there was I think it was still when Andrew was at Irrigation New Zealand. They did a study tour to Nevada to look at a catchment group over there, and they'd done something similar to this, and looked at it and had identified that some blocks within a farm were the problem for the catchment, and essentially the solution was the growers and the territorial authority came together and retired that block of land, and as a result everybody else only had to make small changes because actually 90% of the problem was that block of land, and you can do that. And I think there's a whole other conversation to be had around that. But yeah, so just to give people an idea of the tool. So what we would like to do now is break into groups. So you're all very nicely positioned on individual tables and reasonably well spread. So that'll work, I think. There's Michaela, if you want to hand out some flip chart pages. There should be some post-it notes and some Overseer pens, which you're very welcome to take away with you on the table. If there aren't, sing out, we'll give you some more. What we'd like to do is get you guys to share your wisdom with us to answer these 4 questions, really about how we could achieve change using OverseerFM with catchment groups. What are the barriers and challenges? How do we get best practice sharing? What education and training do we need? And then how might we go about embedding change? So we'll work through that for sort of 15 minutes, and then we'll have a bit of a feedback and discussion at the end. Cool, right, let's have a bit of a feedback and see what you guys have come up with. It's good to hear the discussion's ongoing. Jim, I'll pick on your table. Who's going to be your scribe and report backer? That's good. Most of the other groups have jumped all over the place, so well done. Yeah.
So the cost benefit of it, rather than maybe, sometimes we look at it and say it's a cost. I think we've got proven benefits probably is what people are looking for, rather than just a cheaper cost. And the understanding, probably education is probably, and sort of all of the education and understanding how to take information from the data and actually turn it into something real. You talk about like being able to see real examples in a catchment group kind of context where someone's moved, that chart you showed, moved from being right to bottom. Tracking progress.
Cool.
Decoupling from a sort of compliance removal of a barrier.
Yeah.
And so, quite a few farmers who are quite technically challenged, still a lot of older farmers, especially in the Taranaki area. A lot of older farmers who just...
Yeah. It's actually, I can't remember if I said it, and it's the problem of doing these back to back. I can't remember what I've said in which group now, but it's been really interesting seeing the uptake of Overseer with the FAP Plus scheme. So obviously red meat farmers, and I think it's, obviously traditionally the dairy companies have done the work for the farmers, or they've had a consultant doing it, and then the red meat guys have gone into it and gone, well, how hard can it be? And quite often, I'd say 90% of them are actually doing it all themselves and going in. It's really interesting to see that sort of dynamic going, because we know the age profile of sheep and beef farmers, and yet they're quite happy to see. One guy farmer spent 3 days drawing my map, You know, it's been shit weather. I've had nothing else to do. I spent 3 days drawing my map. You know, we didn't really need to do it that detailed, but cool, good on you. Yeah, it's like. But yeah, no, it's a really interesting one.
There,
Yeah.
Alan's getting away from being caught up in the margin error of the model.
Yes.
And understanding the relativity
Mm.
between
Yeah.
scenarios.
Yeah.
So talking to relativity.
Yeah. Cool.
Hard number.
Brilliant. Cool. Table over by the windows. Well, it doesn't narrow it down, does it? Oh, the table in the corner. Yeah.
Yeah.
Who's your?
For barriers and challenges, we had like trust was a big one. So one of the ways we thought we address that was emphasizing the reliability of the data itself. So the understanding data that you're using to make these models, I guess. What else did we have? Yeah, this one. Best practice sharing, so having like discussion groups and like workshops would be a good idea. Just to get the catchment talking to each other. With education and training, like you were mentioning that you did talks at field days and AMP shows and things like that, raising awareness about it, because you get more participation, then you've got more data, I guess, and you've got more reliability of that data, I guess. Less the error is less influential.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Excellent. Thank you. This table down here, Trish, your table.
So we had barriers in terms were cost, and one way to solve that would be make it cheaper. Another barrier was fear of judgment in the group, and our way of working through that. So yeah, fear of judgment if you're the individual outlier, and our thought for that would be targeted funding for those outliers. Or to the worst affected areas. Subgroups for more targeted solutions. Change in I won't say because I can't really expand on that. So next challenge was how it links to catchment scale thinking, and I don't really know how to expand on that. If anyone wants to expand on that, okay.
We'll read it with interest later. Yeah.
The overseas capabilities, like what kind of information could they be missing for certain farms that might be important.
Cool.
Yeah. And
I think the catchment scale one was that when you look at it, like you've got a group of farms and you're just looking at the worst ones there, but you'd want that thought process of like what's the issues in the catchment or what are the values of the catchment before you look at that stuff. So
Yes.
it's just
Yeah.
how you, I don't know whether Overseer links in with that or
Yeah. Cool. No, thank you.
and we didn't really come up with a to address the last challenge really.
Cool. That's all right. No, great work. Thank you. Janet, you're still scribbling frantically, but.
Yeah, I'm just jotting down what we were talking about. So part of it was a bit of a brain dump, but others was can you filter for a farm system type? Because there are so many different farm systems. And that sheep, beef and deer farmers have little or no opportunity for mitigations in some scenarios, so that's a bit of a problem at the moment. When it came to the barriers and challenges, we were talking about the misconceptions and previous experiences of working with overseer can be a barrier.
Yep.
We didn't know that you could actually use it for catchment groups. It's a big opportunity there.
Yes.
And with that, we said good facilitation, trusted relationships, being clear about what can be expected and how confronting some of these conversations will be. So having supported conversations and farmer-to-farmer support so that those that are needing to make the biggest changes are supported by their peers is going to be really critical. And then we also asked, can you filter for soil type and physiographics so that you can then identify what's the best land use or what's the worst land use for that piece of land and model that. Because at the end of the day, it's a model.
Yes.
So you don't actually have to invest the money and make all the changes and it doesn't work.
Yeah, no, brilliant, thank you. Yeah, and that's a really good point. I think it's, when I was talking to a gentleman that you'll know, Paul Marshall. Paul's a dairy farmer in Southland, and sitting down with him and sort of trying to tease out of why do you spend hours playing with Overseer, and that was very much his answer is, look, I can either sit here and make a farm system change and wait 2 years to see what happens, or I can spend half a day playing with it and see if it's going to be realistic or not and what's going to happen. So, bit of a no-brainer really. On the price, I will just touch on that around the 680, and again, forgive me if I've said any of this in this group before because I've done it twice already and I forget which one was which. So Overseer Limited has the license to operate the Overseer software on behalf of the owners being MPI, Ag Research and the Fertiliser Association. And the constitution of the company precludes us from making a profit, and it precludes us from paying dividends to the owners. So we only have to raise the revenue to operate the company, which is essentially doing development, maintaining the software, paying us lot for supporting it, doing all that stuff, which is, we've been tracking at about 3.5 million a year costs since the business was set up. And we're just starting to go into a bit more of a growth phase, so we'll probably sit 4.5 million of costs this year and next year. So the subscription price, the best way to get the subscription price down is for more people to use it, because literally it's forecast of how many people we think are going to use it divided by what we know our costs are equals the subscription price. Unfortunately, the agricultural minister of the time decided that there should be a subsidy when the software was first introduced, which set an expectation of $200, which has then been something that we've obviously had to grow past because that was never going to be realistic to maintain the software. And obviously we don't like subsidies in New Zealand, so we didn't want it subsidised, did we? Or did we? I don't know. It's often an interesting conversation to have with people. So that's come off. So that's the other challenge we have, and it's a couple of other groups have suggested the idea of, could we do something like a catchment group price, which is something we were just chatting about on the balcony while you guys are working away. The challenge we have is the Commerce Commission has given us legal advice that we are a monopoly. We're the only tool in New Zealand that does what we do. And therefore, as a monopoly, we're not allowed to offer differential pricing. And so we have to have a single price. So it doesn't matter whether you're Palmer when you've got 120 farms, or if you've got a single farm, the cost is 680, because otherwise we would get in trouble with the Commerce Commission. And I don't really fancy that. But I think there's some, we need to go back to them and have that conversation again, I think, around, what that looks like and how we might look at differential pricing. And I think, as a couple of you have sort of said, it's incumbent on us to, hopefully now spend some more time, stop my timer, helping people to understand those multiple benefits that you can get that, as the slide says, as our field day stand says, yes, it is about farmers making changes, but it's about farmers having choices. And that's what we see Overseer as a key tool to enable, is to enable farmers to understand what those choices are and what the impact of those choices are when they then make them. So, any other questions or comments people want to make before we finish? Warwick.
In terms of future development,
Yep.
Your priorities.
So it's an interesting one, because we came out of the redevelopment program, and so we said, well, we've done no science other than the stuff from the redevelopment program for a couple of years. There must be a load of mitigations out here ready to go that we can look at putting in the software, and kind of walked into the desert and found nothing tumbling around, which was a bit disappointing. So essentially the biggest thing we're pushing for at the moment is what are those near market mitigations or just in market mitigations which we need to put in, and we had a conversation with a group before, because it's that whole chicken and egg thing. So one of the things we're working on at the moment is we're working to look at the alignment between Overseer and the National Inventory. So obviously National Inventory is essentially a tier 1 greenhouse gas reporting tool. Overseer we think is sort of a tier 3, 2.5, 3 greenhouse gas reporting tool. So they're never going to be the same, but we need to have alignment. As part of that project, what we're looking at doing is working with them and with Lincoln to get the EcoPond methane inhibitor into Overseer and into the national inventory at the same time. So getting those sorts of things. The nitrous oxide work that's been going on for quite a long period of time should hopefully be on the horizon fairly quickly. And then also looking at those of you that are familiar with the software will know we had a product footprinting tool that was sort of wound back a wee bit. I've got confidence in the dairy results. I've got confidence in the cropping results. We need to tidy up how the model is making its decisions in the red meat sector, because it seems there's no all of the rest of the greenhouse gas work is very well documented through the technical chapters. There are 2 papers that Ag Research gave at the 2011 FLRC conference that describe how the footprinting tool works, and that's all there is. So we're working with Ag Research to go, okay, how should this work? Because it seems to make some strange decisions about when a cow becomes a breeding cow and when it becomes a trading cow, and whether it's a breeding cow or a trading cow impacts the effect it has on the footprint. So there's some very clever assumptions in there, but we want to know whether they're right or not. So it's around those sorts of things. So it's essentially it's very much around. Well, actually, I'll go back, take a step back. The company was set up by the owners because their perception was the way Overseer was structured at the time. So going back to 2015. Being run by Ag Research essentially, and no disrespect to Ag Research, but they're not a software company, was not sustainable given the opportunity for the software and the needs of the software. So the company was set up as a software as a service business. So essentially what we do, and it's my job and Michaela's job, primarily is to engage with our users, to engage with farmers, to engage with stakeholders. So the dairy companies, the banks, the meat companies, the regional councils, everybody else to go, okay, what do you want? What do you want Overseer to do? You tell us what we want it to do. We'll go and find out how we can, give the problem to Mark John to go and get the science to get it done, to get it put in, because we will never, having said that we're operating on a budget perhaps of 4.5 million, we're never going to be commissioning large amounts of science ourselves. We're reliant on the science process to deliver that science to us. But then it's about how do we make sure that that science process is giving us what we need for the model. Which has been really good because, sorry Jim, but there's a whole load of the SLAMAC projects are quite close to delivery, and that was the first round of government funding which actually had a provision put in the contracts that says you have to engage with Overseer through the project, and you have to engage in a way that ensures you deliver results which are being incorporated into Overseer, because we don't want another plantain where we get a whole load of industry work done, millions of dollars spent, and someone turning up with a big pile of paper and saying, right, here it is, put it in Overseer, and you go, you've not collected half the data we need. And it then taking another 3 years to do that. So, Jim.
Assuming the science behind a new mitigation is robust, etc., as you mentioned, what is your time frame and resourcing to bring something into Overseer?
Depends how complex it is. Yeah. I think it's, EcoPond's probably quite a good example. I think we met with Keith and Dee in May, and I'm probably 90% confident we'll have it in by Christmas. And that's probably been slower because we decided to go down this route in conversation with Lincoln and Ravensdown about doing it into the inventory at the same time. So I think it very much depends on what's there. I think a good example, Surephos, and I want to put Surephos in as well. We can't get a phosphorus. If anyone knows a phosphorus expert in New Zealand, how ridiculous is that question? We need someone that can do some phosphorus modelling for us, please, but there isn't anybody available. So we can't put it. Blows my mind.
So there's a number of catchments or areas that have got to reduce their nitrogen leaching to very low levels. Are you working in that space with them at all, or is there opportunity to? There's
definitely opportunity to work in that space if we're not. So yeah, we're keen to work with. We want to see the tool being used. Very much so. Cool. I hope that's been interesting and useful. Thank you very much for the work you've put in. We wanted it to be interactive, and enjoy the rest of the conference.